14. So we got to multiply to negative 14. And we got to add to negative 4. Well, let's try all the pairs. We get 1 and 14, and the bigger one has to be negative because it's negative, so we get negative 13. And then we get 2 and negative 7, which is negative 5. That's it. Those are all the pairs. We cannot find a pair of numbers that multiply to negative 14 and add to negative 4. So what we have to do is use quadratic formula. We want to write out what A is. A is x squared. If it's just x squared by itself, A is 1. It's 1 times x squared. Then we got B. So B is going to be negative 4. Do not forget the negative sign when writing out B and C, right? Because if it's negative, make sure to write it. And then C is a number all by itself. So in this case, C is 14. Negative 14. C is negative 14. All right, make sure to write those out so you can see them. Always good to write them out because now we're just substituting in here. Okay, everywhere we see B. So we see a B first. I see a negative sign, you write the negative sign. See a B, use parentheses when substituting. So negative 4. Use parentheses so that you don't make any mistakes. Plus or minus the square root. B squared, B is negative 4. Use parentheses. That is negative 4 squared. Minus 4 times A. What's A? A is 1. Use parentheses. C is negative 14. Use parentheses. Divided by 2 times A. What's A? 1. Use parentheses. All right? When substituting, use parentheses. That will avoid making mistakes if you do that. Okay? And now all we got to do is simplify. So do the operations. All right? So we get x equals. A negative times negative 4 is a positive 4. Plus or minus. We get the square root of. Negative 4 squared is 16. Because negative 4 times negative 4 and negative times a negative is positive. 4 times 4 is 16. All right? Then we get a negative 4 times 1 times negative 14. Okay? A negative times a negative is positive. And then we've got 14 times 4 is going to be 50. Should be 56. Should be 56 divided by 2. Okay? 2 times 1 is just 2. Next step, we're going to do this addition in the inside of the square root. So it's going to be 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 56. We're going to have a 2 there. And then 5 plus 6 is going to be 72. 72 is a really good number. All right? Divided by 2. Now what we need to be able to do is reduce a square root. All right? When you're reducing a square root, let's do it right here. When reducing a square root, divide the number on the inside, divide by perfect squares. All right? And the perfect squares, you can, 4. 4 is a perfect square because 2 squared is 4. 9 is a perfect square because 3 squared is 9. Now 16 is a perfect square, but 16 is also divisible by 4. So I'm not even going to add it. I'm not going to add it to the list because you're already checking if you do 4. 5 squared is 25. 6 squared. 6 squared is 36, but 36 is divisible by 4 and 9, so I'm not adding it to the list. 7, that would be 49. 8 is divisible by 4, right? 64 is divisible by 4, so I'm not adding it to the list. The last one I'm going to add to the list, I'm not going to add 9 squared because 9 squared is going to be divisible by 9. I'm not going to add 10 squared because that's divisible by 5 and 4. So the last one we're going to do is 121. There's 5 numbers to check while reducing square roots. Okay, so we're going to take 72, the square root of 72, and we're going to reduce it. 72 is not, 72 is divisible by 4. 72 is divisible by 4. So 72 is divisible by 4. So the square root of 72 is the same thing as the square root of 4 times the square root of 18. All right? Square root of 72 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 18. Now, what's nice about the square root of 4 is we know the square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2. Okay, so we can reduce that. Now, the square root of 18 is no longer, 18 is not divisible by 4, but 18 is divisible by 9. All right, so that's what we're going to do. 18, the square root of 18 is the square root of 9 times the square root of 2. And we know what the square root of 9 is. The square root of 9 is 3. And the square root of 2 cannot be reduced, so we're going to leave it as 2 times 3 times the square root of 2. Well, 2 times 3 is 6. That's 6 square roots of 2. That is how the square root of 72 is reduced. The square root of 72 is 6 times the square root of 2. All right? So now what we're going to do is replace this, right? Replace the square root of 72. And we're going to need to free up a little bit of space somewhere. We're going to continue the problem right here. It's not ideal, but that's what we're doing, okay? So this is going to be x equals 4 plus or minus 6 square root 2 divided by 2. And now what we need to do, the very last step, is to distribute the division. We're going to distribute the division. Okay, so we get x equals 4 divided by 2 plus or minus 6 square root 2 divided by 2. Okay, and we get x equals 2 plus or minus 3 square root 2. That's our final answer. We can go over why. 4 divided by 2 is the 2, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. You can never mess with anything in a square root to anything with outside of the square root. So we're going to leave it as this. All of your problems, hey, how you doing? Come on in, come on in. We're all right. All of your problems are multiple choice with the quadratic formula. So you'll just select the one that looks like that. All right, sorry, I'm recording.